I could hear the clock ticking above the sink, slow and steady, like it was waiting to witness something terrible. The tile was cold against my cheek, and the air smelled like garlic, wine, and something wrong. My limbs were heavy, my vision blurred, but I wasn't gone. Not yet. I heard the chair scrape. I heard his shoes walk past me. Then his voice, quiet, steady, like this was just another chore. He said, "It's done. They'll both be gone soon." And then, he stepped outside. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. But when my son's fingers reached for mine, I knew. He was still with me. And that's when I whispered, "Don't move yet. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me." I know stories like this aren't easy to hear, and they're certainly not easy to tell. But sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones we need most. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe it's your kitchen, maybe a quiet room where no one bothers you, maybe a place you retreat to when your heart needs rest. Wherever it is, I want you to know that I'm not here to shout or make noise. I'm here to speak plainly, because I've lived long enough to know that betrayal doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes, it sits beside you at the table. Sometimes it kisses you goodnight and says it loves you while holding the weight of a lie in its chest. And if you've ever loved someone with everything in you, if you gave them years, and time, and softness, and sacrifice, and didn't realize until it was nearly too late that they'd stop loving you back, then I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll hear this story to the end. Not just for me, but maybe for something in you that's still healing. Because what happened next wasn't just about what he did. It was about what I chose to do after. And that part, that quiet part, that's the one I hope stays with you. I'm 64 now, and I've spent most of my life trying to be the kind of woman who keeps things steady. I raised my son with care, worked as a nurse for over 3 decades, gave everything I had to both home and hospital, and tried to love without keeping score. I met William when I was 29. He had this quiet charm about him, the kind that didn't rush you but pulled you in like a gentle tide. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but when he looked at you, it felt like he saw something worth staying for. I liked that about him. I still remember the way he held my hand on our 3rd date. Not like a man trying to impress me, but like someone afraid to let go too soon. We got married within a year, bought a modest house, nothing fancy. I brought in most of the income, especially after he left his job and decided to take a break. That somehow lasted longer than it should have. But I never minded carrying the weight, as long as we felt like a team. When our son Tyler came along, everything felt more real. William wasn't the warmest father, but when he did something kind, it stood out. He'd cook Tyler's favorite meals on birthdays, or show up with a small gift just because. Tyler adored him in that way boys sometimes do, the kind that hopes attention means love. And I guess I did too. I told myself we were stable. Not romantic, maybe not exciting, but solid, predictable, comfortable. But comfort has a quiet way of disguising the things you don't want to see. I started noticing the way William's phone never left his side, even in the shower. Late-night drives that he said were to clear his head, but I always noticed the faint cologne he didn't wear for me. Bank statements with little gaps. Insurance paperwork on the desk that suddenly vanished after I asked too many questions. When I brought up my concerns, he'd tilt his head and smile like I was overthinking things, like I was too tired or too emotional from long shifts, and I believed him, because I didn't want to believe anything else. I think back now and wonder when exactly we started living next to each other instead of with each other. The shift didn't happen in a fight or a moment. It happened slowly, like wallpaper peeling behind furniture, out of sight until it's too late to patch. I kept telling myself we were just aging, that love changes shape, that silence meant peace. But what I didn't realize was that his silence wasn't filled with peace. It was filled with plans I wasn't part of. It was a Friday. I had just come home from an early shift at the clinic, and my body was begging for rest. The air outside was warm, soft even, that kind of early evening calm where everything feels just a little slower. I walked in expecting the usual, maybe leftovers from the fridge or a quiet house, but instead I was met with the smell of onions sautéing, something tangy in the air, and William in the kitchen wearing an apron he hadn't touched in years. He looked up and smiled like he'd been waiting for me all day. Said he wanted to do something nice. That we all deserved a real meal. He said he was making spaghetti with meat sauce, Tyler's favorite. I paused for a moment, surprised, even a little touched. It wasn't like him, not lately. But I didn't question it too much. I thought maybe it was his way of trying, his version of apology without words. He even set the table with the good plates, poured a little wine, lit a candle. I hadn't seen him do anything like that in maybe a decade. I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you. Tyler came down from his room and smiled when he saw the spread. He didn't ask questions either. Maybe he thought, like I did, that we were turning some quiet corner. That maybe love doesn't go away, it just sleeps. And this was the moment it woke up again. The food smelled good. Looked good. I took my first bite slowly, the way you do when you're not sure if your heart can handle the moment being real. And it was good, at first. Warm. Familiar. He sat with us, asked about my shift, nodded at Tyler's jokes. We weren't laughing out loud, but we were smiling. Or at least I was trying to. By the third bite, I felt something strange. Not sharp, not painful, but distant. Like my body was starting to move a few seconds slower than my mind. My arms felt heavy, and I noticed my glass of wine was still mostly full, but my mouth was dry. I looked across the table at Tyler. He blinked a few times, shook his head like he was trying to clear it, and then I saw his hand slide off the edge of the table. He tried to speak, but his words came out slurred. That's when my fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate with a dull clang. I tried to stand, but my legs didn't respond. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought it was just exhaustion, just me overreacting. But it wasn't. I felt my body give in, slumping sideways in the chair, and then I heard my own breath, shallow, wrong. Everything around me blurred at the edges. My limbs wouldn't move, but my ears still worked. I don't know how long I laid there before he moved, but it felt like time slowed into something thick and unbearable. My eyes were half closed, just enough to see the blurry outline of him standing from his chair, collecting the plates one by one, like this was any ordinary night. He wasn't in a hurry, not even a little. There was no panic in his steps, no hesitation in his breath. He walked to the counter, rinsed his hands, and reached for his phone. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear him, clear, calm, like he was checking in after a job well done. He said, "It's done. They'll both be gone soon. I'll handle the rest tomorrow." And then he laughed, soft under his breath. That's when I felt something inside me break, not from the poison working through my body, but from the truth settling in my chest. He meant to kill us, both of us, and he didn't even flinch. He stepped out the back door like he was just going to take the trash out. I didn't move. I kept my breathing slow and shallow, just in case he looked back. And then, when I was sure he was gone, I shifted my fingers ever so slightly across the floor. That's when I felt it, Tyler's hand, still warm, still holding on. He wasn't gone, he was fighting just like me. I couldn't speak loud, couldn't risk it, so I whispered just enough for him to hear. I said, "Don't move yet." And when he squeezed my hand back, that small pressure was the strongest thing I'd felt in years. We waited like that, quiet, barely breathing, counting every second like it was a prayer. Once we heard the car pull away, I pushed myself to roll toward the counter, inch by inch. My muscles weren't working right. Everything inside me felt slow and wrong. But I wasn't going to let it end there. I used the corner of the cabinet to drag myself up. My knees buckled, but I didn't stop. I reached the landline by the wall and knocked it down to the floor, pressing the buttons as best I could. When the operator answered, all I could say was our address. Just that. Over and over. Tyler was trying to sit up now, his face pale and sweating. He crawled toward the sink, retching into the basin, shaking but conscious. I could see how hard he was trying to stay with me, even when everything in him must have wanted to give up. Help came faster than I thought it would, or maybe I just lost track of time. The paramedics kicked the door in, voices loud and frantic, lights flashing against the kitchen walls. One of them lifted me and said I was lucky. That's the word they used, lucky. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't find the air. They kept asking questions I couldn't answer, kept checking our vitals, giving injections, trying to stop the damage. I looked at my son on the stretcher next to mine, his eyes barely open, but alive. That's all that mattered to me in that moment. We were alive. And as they carried us out of that house, strapped to gurneys, I kept thinking one thing. I wasn't done. And I wouldn't die quietly. Not for a man who smiled while he served poison. Not for a plan that thought I wouldn't fight back. Not for someone who forgot who he married. The hospital lights were too bright, too white, the kind that make you feel small no matter how strong you think you are. I could hear the wheels of the stretcher squeaking as they rushed us in. One nurse calling out numbers, another cutting through my clothes, someone asking questions I couldn't answer fast enough. My mouth was too dry, my limbs still trembling. Tyler was in the next room. I could hear him groaning, the sound of him retching again into something metal. Every second felt like it stretched into hours. I wanted to get up, hold his face in my hands and tell him we were okay, that it was over. But it wasn't. Not yet. They took our blood, ran lines into both arms and kept asking if we remembered what we ate, what we drank, if anyone else had access to our food. I kept repeating the same thing. Spaghetti, meat sauce, wine, William cooked dinner. Their faces changed when I said it. Not dramatic, but subtle. Like they were already forming a picture in their heads that I wasn't ready to see. I caught one nurse glancing toward another, a kind of look you learn to recognize after years in a hospital. Something was wrong. They kept me in observation, took Tyler for more scans, and all I could do was lie there and listen to the machines beep and the air vents hum above me, thinking how strange it was that the same man who once held my hand through childbirth had just tried to erase both me and the boy we raised. When the toxicology came back, one of the nurses gently sat by my bed. She didn't speak right away, just looked at me for a moment, as if trying to find a soft way to deliver something sharp. Then she leaned close, lowered her voice, and said, "There were two things in your system. A sedative and trace levels of rat poison. Someone mixed them together, slowly acting, not enough to kill on the spot, but enough to do damage." I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, because deep down I already knew. My body had known the moment it gave out. My mind had caught up the second I heard him whisper. This was never about food. It was about removal, elimination. A clean slate for him. I thought that was the worst of it, until she whispered again. Almost as an afterthought, like she didn't know if she should even say it out loud. She said, "Ma'am, the police just spoke to the hospital admin. Your life insurance was updated last week. The beneficiary isn't you anymore." My throat tightened. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like it was trying to conserve strength for what was coming. I asked, "Who is it?" Her answer was quiet. "We don't have the name yet, but it's not your son either. It's a woman, someone new." His emergency contact changed too. It was his mistress, his plan, his timeline. So neatly arranged, I could almost see the calendar he must have used. A dinner date, a call afterward, a payout on paper. He wanted the house, the money, the freedom. He didn't want to divorce me, he wanted to bury me. And Tyler was just a detail he didn't mind losing to keep things tidy. 30 years of marriage reduced to a signature, a whisper, and a meal. And still, I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I closed my eyes and told myself one thing. I will get up from this bed, and I will make sure he never gets away with any of it. Not a dollar. Not a lie. Not even his silence. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the hospital sheets off my body and curse the ceiling or cry into the pillows. I became something else. Still. Sharp. Focused. The kind of quiet that comes when the heart is no longer guessing, no longer begging for an explanation, no longer hoping to be wrong. I waited until Tyler was stable enough to rest. Then I asked the nurse for a pen and paper. I began writing down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, how many times I'd seen him on his phone with the door closed, every late-night drive, every receipt that had vanished from our shared drawer. I knew none of this would mean anything unless I could prove it. So, I treated it like a case file. Not a wife remembering her life, but a witness preparing for testimony. By the time we were discharged, I had a small folder filled with notes and copies of anything the hospital would give me. I didn't go home. Not right away. I took Tyler to stay with my cousin on the other side of town, someone I trusted, someone far enough from the house that William wouldn't think to look there. I told her a softer version of the truth, enough to make her say yes without questions I couldn't answer yet. Then I went back to that house, alone. Not because I was brave, but because I needed what was inside. I opened drawers, checked the cabinet above the fridge, where he thought I never looked, flipped through the back of our filing cabinet, where the folders were labeled with neat handwriting he thought I never read. I found the insurance forms, the new signatures, the name of the woman he'd listed, the dates they were signed, the phone number written in small ink at the bottom corner of one sheet. I found bank withdrawals, a separate account in his name only, just opened 3 months ago. I took photos of everything with my old phone, saved them to a drive, printed what I could, and made copies of the copies. The next morning, I sat across from a lawyer I hadn't seen in 10 years, a man who once helped us with our wills. He looked at me with surprise, not just because of how I looked, but because of how I spoke. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't stammering. I laid the documents out on his desk, one by one, like cards in a game I no longer had to bluff through. I told him exactly what had happened, exactly what I suspected, and exactly what I planned to do next. He asked if I had gone to the police. I told him not yet, but I would. I wasn't ready to let emotion cloud the report. I wanted the words to be clean, controlled, undeniable. After the meeting, I went straight to the station. I gave them everything I had. They took my statement, started their own investigation, said I'd done more than most people could in my condition. I nodded once and left. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his witness. I was the one who would speak when his silence tried to rewrite the story. And I would not stop until every word he'd buried beneath gestures and dinners and smiles was dragged back into the light. He wanted us gone. He wanted the money. But what he failed to understand was that when a woman survives a lie that deep, she doesn't come back looking for love. She comes back looking for the truth. And she won't leave without it. It only took 2 days, 48 hours of waiting, watching the phone, listening for updates, checking the driveway every time a car passed, wondering if I'd see his headlights again before the law did. I didn't sleep much during those 2 nights. I couldn't. Not with every creak of the house reminding me that I'd once shared a bed with a man who had calmly decided we were expendable. When the call finally came from the detective, I sat down in the same kitchen chair where I'd last seen his face. The officer's voice was steady. He said William had been picked up outside of town, just past the gas station we used to stop at on road trips. He was alone, calm, driving under the speed limit. No fight, no resistance, just a man behind the wheel, acting like life hadn't cracked open behind him. They brought him in quietly, cuffed him on the side of the road, and placed him in a holding cell like any other suspect. There was no screaming, no headlines, just a man finally being seen for what he really was. When the trial began, I sat in the second row of the courtroom, hands folded, papers neatly stacked in the bag beside me. Tyler didn't come. I didn't want him to see his father like that. I needed him to keep whatever small piece of childhood he still had left untouched by courtroom lights and polished shoes walking across tiled floors. William entered with a suit and a face I used to love. His hair combed, his eyes tired but not broken. He looked around like he was trying to figure out how the room got so full. When his eyes met mine, he didn't flinch, he didn't drop his gaze. He offered a half smile like this was just some misunderstanding. Like I had made a mess of something simple. Like all of this could still be fixed with a conversation. And when he spoke, I saw the performance I'd grown blind to over the years. He said it was a mistake. A terrible mix-up. That he hadn't changed anything. That someone must have forged the documents, that he couldn't explain the toxicology, but maybe it was the wine, maybe something spoiled in the kitchen. He looked at the jury like he was asking them to believe in the old version of him. The man who cooked on birthdays, who smiled in family photos, who kissed his wife on the forehead before bed. He said I'd been under stress, that the hospital confused the records, that grief had warped my memory. He painted me as unstable, as overwhelmed, as tired. But the insurance papers didn't lie. The signatures were his. The dates in his handwriting. The policy change was processed by a company that had his voice on file. The toxicology didn't lie. The lab results showed substances no one keeps in a kitchen by accident. And my memory didn't lie. I knew what I heard that night as I lay paralyzed on the floor. His voice, low and certain, saying, "It's done." No fear, no regret, just a man closing a chapter he thought would never be reopened. The prosecutor laid everything out: the motive, the timeline, the financial trail. Witnesses from the insurance company, hospital staff, bank managers, all of them told the same story in different ways. And I sat there, silent, unmoved, letting the weight of it all settle in that room like dust that would never be cleaned again. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to point fingers. All I had to do was tell the truth and let his lies collapse under their own weight. Watching his expression shift from control to discomfort, from disbelief to silence, it wasn't victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was grief. Not for him, but for the woman I used to be before I ever needed to learn how to testify against the man I promised forever to. When the trial came to a close and the sentence was handed down, they asked me if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. Something formal. Something to be read into the record. Something that would sit there on paper beside the charges and verdict and become part of the case file forever. I looked at the woman who asked me, kind eyes and clipboard in hand, and I told her no. I told her I had already made my statement the moment I crawled across that kitchen floor to the phone. The moment I whispered to my son not to move. The moment I chose to survive instead of disappear. That was my statement. That was my impact. I didn't need to put it into words for the court because I had lived every line of it already. Still, when the day came to close that chapter, when the reporters left and the courtroom doors finally shut behind us, I did something that might have looked like mourning from the outside. I went home, opened my closet, and took out the black dress I had almost donated twice. I ironed it smooth, slipped it on, and sat alone in the living room of the house we once built together. The same walls that once heard wedding plans and laughter and lullabies now held the echo of betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't light candles or play music. I didn't even tell anyone what I was doing. I just sat still, in silence, wearing black, not for grief, but for something heavier. I wore it for the burial of trust, for the quiet laying to rest of a marriage I had been trying to save, long after it had already died. I wore black for the woman I used to be, who ignored her instincts, who explained away the late nights and missing money and the growing chill in the room that no blanket could fix. There was no funeral, no service, no eulogy, but there was loss, a different kind of loss. The kind that doesn't get sympathy cards or flowers. The kind of loss that doesn't fit inside a frame or a headline. The kind of loss where the person is still breathing, still speaking, still walking this earth, and yet they're no longer real to you. Because the man I thought I married, the man I cooked for, cleaned for, held through illness and leaned on in quiet moments, he was gone long before the poison touched my tongue. He had vanished, piece by piece, smile by smile, until all that was left was a version of him that looked the same on the outside but had hollowed out everything inside. And so I sat in that black dress alone, not to mourn him, but to say goodbye to the illusion. To the years I'd wrapped around a promise that no longer lived. To the memories I'd have to sift through carefully, separating what was real from what was rehearsal. It wasn't a funeral, not in the traditional sense, but for me it was the only kind that mattered. Quiet, final, honest. A moment for myself, to bury what had tried to bury me. And when I stood up from that chair and changed into something soft and blue, I didn't look back at the dress. I folded it, placed it at the back of the closet, and closed the door. Because that chapter was over, and I was still here, still breathing, still choosing what comes next. After the trial ended and the last paper was signed, I walked back into the house not as a wife, not as a victim, but as someone in the process of reclaiming her own skin. The silence inside was different now. It wasn't heavy with unspoken questions or cold glances. It was clean, still, mine. I opened every window and let the air move through the rooms, let it carry out anything left behind that didn't belong to me anymore. The first thing I did was change the locks. Not out of fear, but because it felt necessary, like drawing a new line between who I used to be and who I was becoming. I wanted every turn of that key to remind me that I had a say in what entered my space and what no longer did. I packed things slowly. I wasn't in a rush to leave, but I knew I couldn't stay. That house held too many memories, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering which ones were true and which ones had been staged to keep me comfortable and blind. I sold the house within a month. No ceremony, no sadness. Just a signature and a walkthrough where I didn't pause in any of the rooms. I took what mattered, left what didn't, and called it done. Tyler didn't say much, but when we stood on the sidewalk one last time and I handed the keys to the new owners, he reached for my hand, and that was enough. I used some of the money to take us away, just for a little while. Nothing grand, just a small rental cottage by the coast. We stayed a week. No TV, no noise, just long walks on the shore and quiet meals without tension. We sat in the sand, listening to waves that didn't care who we used to be. The salt air softened something in both of us. Tyler brought a sketch pad. I brought an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. I began to write, not about what had happened, but about the moments that were still mine, the ones untouched by him. I wrote about my mother's kitchen, the sound of rain on the roof when I was 7, the way Tyler used to hold my finger with his whole hand when he was little. I painted too, nothing good, just colors and shapes, but it made the hours feel gentler. I even laughed. Not all at once, not loudly, but it came in small waves, unexpected, honest. Healing didn't come wrapped in anger or revenge. It didn't march in loud with declarations or demands. It came with small mornings, with the smell of fresh coffee and no fear behind it, with sunlight on clean sheets and the sound of my son sleeping peacefully in the next room. It came with silence that didn't feel dangerous, with a breath that didn't catch halfway through, with remembering who I was before I was someone's wife, someone's almost obituary. I was still that woman, a little older, a little wiser, but still capable of building something soft and true. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was already there. It was early spring when the letter arrived, tucked in a plain white envelope with no return address. But the handwriting was familiar in that way certain things never stop being, even when you wish they would. The curves of the letters, the way he slanted his E's, the spacing between each word, it was all still his. I sat at the table for a long time before opening it, the afternoon sun slipping through the window onto the wood like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't want to read it. Not really. But part of me needed to know what he thought he could possibly say now, after everything. It was 4 pages, handwritten, the ink uneven in places like his hand had trembled or the pen had fought back. He started with my name, no greeting, no warmth. Just my name and a heavy pause beneath it. He said he didn't know how to begin, that he never meant for things to go that far, that he had snapped. That pressure had built up over the years and he didn't know where to put it anymore. He said he had loved me, still did, in some strange twisted way, and that it wasn't about hate or anger. It was about release, about needing freedom, about loving me too much to leave the normal way. Those were his words. That he loved me too much to start over. I sat with that sentence for a long time, reading it again and again, not because I believed it, but because I needed to understand how someone could twist something so dark into the shape of devotion. Love doesn't kill. Love doesn't serve poison and call it spaghetti. Love doesn't watch the person you built a life with collapse across from you and step out for the night like it's the end of a shift. Love doesn't draw up policies and hide them in cabinets. It doesn't whisper "it's done" over the body of the son you helped bring into this world. And love doesn't leave a woman carrying both the betrayal and the cleanup while pretending the crime was affection. He asked for forgiveness, not directly, but in that tone people use when they don't want to ask out loud, because hearing the word no might echo too long. He said he hoped I was okay, that he heard we were recovering well, that maybe someday we could speak again. As if the damage he left was a dent, not a crater. As if what he'd done could ever be handled over coffee or letters. I didn't reply. I folded the pages back together, tight and neat, not because they deserved care, but because it made burning them easier. I walked out back behind the small house I was renting now, lit a match, and watched as the paper curled and blackened. The fire didn't hiss or fight. It just took the words slowly, swallowing them line by line, turning ink to ash. I didn't say a word. I just stood there until every piece had turned cold, and the smoke drifted up into the sky like it was carrying what little was left of him away from me. He still exists. somewhere behind walls and locks, maybe writing more words to someone else, maybe still believing he was misunderstood. But I don't carry him with me anymore. That letter was the last thing I allowed in. After that, the door stayed closed, and not just to him, but to the version of me that once waited at that door for him to come home. If you're still here with me, after all this, then maybe there's something in your own heart that needed to hear this. So let me ask you something gently, without judgment, just woman to woman, soul to soul. Have you ever loved someone who turned on you so quietly, so skillfully, that by the time you noticed, they'd already built a life where you didn't exist? Someone who held your hand while mapping out your exit. Someone who looked you in the eye and smiled while planning how to make you disappear. Not with noise or anger, but with silence, with paperwork, with meals. Because I have. I know what that kind of betrayal feels like. It's not loud, it doesn't scream, it drips, it seeps. It comes in through the cracks you thought were harmless. It disguises itself as routine. And by the time you see it clearly, you're already on the floor trying to remember how to stand. You might be listening to this in a quiet room, or maybe with dishes in the sink and thoughts you haven't said out loud. Maybe you've brushed something off for years that didn't sit right, and hearing this made that feeling come back. Maybe someone has made you question your own memory, your own gut, your own worth. I want you to know something, and I need you to hear it not with your ears, but with your whole being. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You are aware. You are waking up. And that is not weakness. That is survival starting to speak. I used to think healing had to come with a big moment, some kind of closure or confrontation, something loud that said, now it's over. But what I've learned is that healing often whispers. It comes in soft forms, like telling the truth out loud, even if no one else is in the room. Like locking your door at night and sleeping soundly for the first time in years. Like smiling and not immediately wondering if someone's keeping score. It comes in the stillness of realizing you don't need anyone to validate what you know. That your truth matters, even if no one else ever agrees with it. I don't have all the answers, and I never want to pretend I do. But I do know what it means to rebuild from pieces. To gather the fragments of a love that turned dangerous and make something safe out of what remains. I know what it feels like to stare at the past and not recognize the person who used to carry so much of your joy. And I know the strength it takes to let that go. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with a steady hand and a clear heart. If this story reached you, if any part of it mirrored something inside you that you haven't put into words yet, I want you to know you're not alone. Your story might not look like mine, but your hurt is just as real, your clarity just as powerful. Don't ignore what feels off. Don't shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And don't ever think that loving someone means losing yourself along the way. The moment you start to listen to that quiet voice inside, the one that says something isn't right, that's the moment you start saving yourself. You're not broken. You're not late. You're just awake now. And that's the first step. I used to think that when love ends, it's the loud part that hurts the most. The shouting, the leaving, the slammed doors. But that's not what stayed with me. What stayed was the quiet, the kind of silence that comes when trust dies. And I've learned that trust doesn't go out gently. It crashes. It takes pieces of you with it, pieces you didn't know were breakable until they weren't yours anymore. I forgave myself before I forgave him. Because I needed to. I had to let go of all the ways I tried to make it make sense. My son still asks me sometimes, not with words but with his eyes, why his father did it. And I still don't have the answer. Maybe I never will. But I do know this. We survived. And sometimes, that's louder than justice. If this story meant something to you, if it stayed with you in any small or quiet way, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. There's more to share, more stories like this, stories that speak the truth, gently but deeply. And if you're walking through your own healing, I want you here with me. So go ahead and subscribe, stay a while, you're not alone here. Thank you for watching.